Hi guys, I'm sure you've heard I've got the COVID and that stinks. I can't be at school with you. Thankfully, my symptoms are very mild. I had a bit of a fever last night, couldn't sleep very well, but I was able to take 2 naps today. Some ibuprofen is taking care of the fever, got some sniffles, and that is it. I'm feeling quite fine. Um, Wishing I could get back to you guys. I don't know how much you remember from our videos, but at this time, John Adams is president, and then later Thomas Jefferson is going to be president in a minute. And England and France are fighting the Napoleonic Wars, and they're both mad at us because we're trying to be neutral. Both sides are mistreating us, and eventually Adams does get a treaty signed with England to get them to lay off us. They were taking our ships and stuff. And then France is being just a huge jerk. Remember, Citizen Gannett tried to drag America into the war, and that failed. Then the XYZ affair, where 3 gentlemen named Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z demanded bribes to stop attacking our ships. And we said, millions for defense, but not 1 cent in tribute. And so we get ready to fight if we need to fight France. Thankfully, we never did declare war with France. We did not have the resources. We don't have the Navy or the Army to invade France at this time. We are a very young nation. Um, but we do raise some privateers and build some ships, and we do go fight some naval battles, even though we're not at war. They're attacking our ships without declaring war, so we're going to attack them and defend ourselves. We call this the quasi war, quasi meaning kind of, almost, not really, because there is fighting, there are people killed, there's ships sunk. We managed to do very, very well. We captured 90 French vessels in this war, and we lost one. So American shipbuilding and American naval officers are doing very, very well. 90 to 1. And by the time we capture 90 of their vessels, they're ready to come to the peace table and decide to stop attacking our ships. Remember, the big reason why both France and England were attacking our ships is because we didn't have a navy. We couldn't defend ourselves. And now we're proving, you know what? We can defend ourselves. Many Americans wanted to defend France, but Adams says, you know, you might be mad at France, and I'm mad at France too, but there's just no way, Jose. It's just not going to happen. We cannot invade France with more than a handful of soldiers, and no, we can't do it. It's unrealistic. So the French have gone through their revolution. They've had government after government after government. Everyone's guillotining everyone else. Really nasty until this man takes control of the entire French government. His name, Napoleon Bonaparte, the world's most interesting evil dictator. And he took over all of France and then starts taking over all the rest of the continent of Europe. He fought everyone in Europe. Let's see, I think first he went down to Italy, conquered Italy, then Spain, and then Austria and Germany, and he's just attacking everyone. And he is smack dab in the middle of fighting every single one of his neighbors all at once when this quasi war is going on. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to bother fighting America and all these other people. America's, just a fly. They're pesky, but you know, we don't want to bother with them. We have our own battles. So he wants to play nice with us. At one point when Napoleon's not doing so well, he is in need of, well, maybe not in need of our help, but he needs us to not be attacking him as well. So we're able to use that against him and negotiate a peace treaty called the Convention of 1800. And Adams says that this convention, this peace treaty, is the best thing I ever did for America. John Adams, a founding father, helped write the Constitution, helped write the Declaration of Independence. Um, he was our first vice president and second president. He did, an awful lot of good for America. And he says the best thing that I did for America is keeping us out of war with France. War with France would have been absolutely devastating for us, especially so early in our history. And so that's what he wanted written on his tombstone. He kept us out of war. So I found the quote by John Adams right here on my phone. He says, I desire no other inscription over my gravestone than, here lies John Adams, who took upon himself the responsibility of peace with France in the year 1800. thought that was the best thing he did for our country. Pretty cool. Unfortunately, Adams was not a perfect president, and he passed these laws that I think were really bad. I think this was a major mistake, called the Alien and Sedition Acts. If you didn't know, alien means an outsider. It means a foreigner. So of course, when we think alien, we think someone who's foreign to the planet. He comes from a different planet. Back then, it's someone who's foreign to your country. If sedition means treason, means saying bad things about your country or fighting against your country. Adams and his party passed the Alien and Sedition laws, or acts, saying that America is in the middle of an emergency, and in an emergency, we're allowed to do things that we wouldn't do otherwise to protect America in wartime. The Alien Acts are a couple of laws about foreigners and made immigration much more difficult. So it let fewer people into America, and then it made it longer to become a citizen. So it used to take 5 years of living in America, and then you're allowed to apply to become a citizen. They changed that law to say you have to be in America for 14 years. And they passed this law because a lot of the immigrants who come in and become citizens are then voting for Adams's opposition, Jefferson's party, not Adams. And so they said, well, we don't want you voting for those guys, so you don't get to vote for 14 years. That is not fair. I don't know what is the perfect time period between coming to America and being allowed to become a citizen. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I don't know. I think 5 years is a good number, but almost tripling the amount of time specifically so they won't vote for your enemy. Come on, that's not cool. That's not fair. The government should be reflecting the people, so we should not cheat in a democracy and have just my people vote. The Sedition Act said it is considered treason against America to criticize the president or anything the president does. So if you criticize the government, or if you criticize the war with France or the quasi war with France, if you say, I don't think we should go to war with France, then you could be chucked in jail because now you're a traitor. It's like, whoa, wait a second. What about freedom of speech? Isn't that one of our most beloved freedoms, is that I'm allowed to say what I want to say. I'm allowed to believe what I want to believe. And if I don't like the president, I should be able to say, I don't like the president. I should be able to say, vote for someone else. Don't vote for this guy again. These laws, especially the Sedition Acts, you're not allowed to criticize the president. It's turning the president into a dictator, not responsible to the people. Not good. The Democratic Republicans are Jefferson's party. Adams' party is called the Federalists. The Democratic Republicans saw both these laws as very unconstitutional and unfair, said this is obviously an attack on us, but if we say anything about it, we'll get chucked in jail because we're criticizing the president, so we're traitors now because we disagree with the president. Most immigrants were for the Democratic Republicans. So the Sedition Acts took away freedom of speech, and you can get thrown in jail for saying, vote for Jefferson, don't vote for Adams. You can get thrown in jail for that. And that's not okay, not at all. Okay, so what is Jefferson and his party of Democratic Republicans going to do about these unfair laws? Um, well, they're not going to start a revolution. They're not going to have American Revolution Part 2. No, they're going to fight it through legal means, by talking about it, by writing about it, and by running for office against John Adams. Madison and Jefferson write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, two states that were more Democratic Republican, that said these laws are unfair and unconstitutional. And these resolutions claim that if the central government writes an unfair law, an unconstitutional law, then it is the state's job to ignore those laws. It's the state's job to call it unconstitutional and nullify it or make it worthless, erase those laws. It's the state's job to stand up to the central government. Now, they never did formally declare nullification. They never did nullify these laws. And that is because there was an election coming up, and Jefferson got in and got rid of those laws very quickly. But ever since the Jefferson and Madison papers, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, ever since then, whenever the federal government writes a law that a state doesn't like, they always grumble and talk about nullification, and they never do act upon it until the Civil War, even though they talked about it a lot. Today, we say it's not the state's job to nullify a law as unconstitutional. It is the Supreme Court's job to decide if a law is unconstitutional. They're the ones who get to strike that down, not an individual state, just the Supreme Court. So 1800 rolls around and it is an election year. The Federalists nominate John Adams again and Charles Pinckney to run as his vice president. And the Republicans, or Democratic Republicans, choose Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And here's a little breakdown of what they believed in. John Adams and the Federalists wanted the wealthier to have more of a say in government. They wanted the federal government to be a strong government, stronger than the states. Emphasis on manufacturing and factories, that is the way of the future. A loose interpretation of the Constitution that would let the government do what it needs to do. And they were pro-English. Jefferson and his party are completely the opposite. They wanted rule by the commoners, especially the farmers. They wanted the states to be more powerful than the central government. They wanted an emphasis on agriculture and farming, not on big business. They wanted a very strict interpretation of the Constitution that would keep the central government weaker, and they were pro-French. And then something crazy happens. They tie. Jefferson and Burr, running for president and vice president, get the same number of votes. And now they're both in the same party, but they tie. And Burr, at first, had promised to be the vice president, but now that he sees how popular he is, he says, well, I want to run as president. Now you have two people from the same party running as president. So there's a kind of a crazy situation here. And in case of a tie, the House of Representatives gets to vote on who will be the next president. They get to decide the next president. That is not just in case of a tie. It's in case no one gets more than 50%, which they did not. And now Aaron Burr says, I want to be president rather than vice president because president's way more powerful. The House of Representatives votes 35 times with a deadlock every single time. Tie, 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 tie. Over a week, they vote 35 times and no one changes their vote until finally someone changes their vote. 36th vote, one man changed from Burr to Jefferson. Now Jefferson is president and Aaron Burr is vice president. But of course, Jefferson's not very happy with Burr for trying to steal the presidency from him. Or not steal, but, going back on his plan. You can see here who voted for who. The blue is voting for Adams and the green is voting for Jefferson. Pretty close. All right, let's look at the court system and how it got to be a strong branch of government. There was a vacancy in the Supreme Court of the United States during Adams' term, and that means that Adams gets to pick who's going to be the next Supreme Court justice. There was a vacancy in the Supreme Court because the guy quit. He quit the Supreme Court so he could run for governor of New York. Because at that time, the Supreme Court was not very powerful and the governorship was very powerful. So he picks John Marshall. John Marshall was a representative from Virginia, and he gets voted in by the Senate. Now he's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And John Marshall is going to make the Supreme Court what it is today, very powerful. Democratic Republicans dislike the Supreme Court because it's undemocratic. The people don't get to vote on it. And it's very ceremonial. It is very august. It is very formal, prim and proper, unlike the people's house, like the House of Representatives. So immediately, John Marshall looks for ways to strengthen the Supreme Court into one of the three equal branches of government that it really should be. One thing he did is, how there's multiple judges on the Supreme Court. They all used to write their own opinions, which just means their reasons for voting yes or no, guilty or not guilty or whatever. He said, let's have one person write for everyone, and that'll help unify the courts. He says if you are a Supreme Court justice, you should not be political at all. You're not allowed to campaign for this guy or that guy. Because imagine if, the Supreme Court justice was a super duper Jefferson fan and you voted for John Adams. maybe you might feel like he's not going to be fair to you because you're of a different political party for him. I mean, imagine today if you went to court and the judges are all wearing Hillary t-shirts, and you're like, well, I don't like Hillary very much. You would feel like you're not getting proper justice. So they're allowed to have political opinions, of course, but they should keep that to themselves and not be for one party or another party. They're for justice in America as a whole. He used restraint. He did not go full steam ahead doing whatever John Adams wanted him to do. He has political opinions, and he's not going to do all of them right away because he wants people to trust him that he's going to do what's best for the country, not just for his party. He's not trying to be an activist judge. He's not trying to get his will done. He's just trying to judge court cases as he sees fit. And one thing he did was back then you got to go to the tailor and tell him to make a very ornate robe for you, and everyone would have their own special robe. He said, you know what, everyone wear black, just black robes. It's formal, but it's not like gold ribbons everywhere. It's like, nah, just plain black. So we're not standing on ceremony too much. So I really do respect John Adams, but there's just a couple things about him that I really do think were not great. The Alien Sedition Acts I really don't like. And then the Judiciary Act and the Midnight Judges. Here's another story of something that John Adams did that I really don't think he should have done. So the week before he's about to leave office, this is months after the election, which, by the way, it is weird. They have an election, but then the last guy is still president for several more months. Weird. Anyway, John Adams is president for several months, and the week before Thomas Jefferson is supposed to become president, they completely overhaul the court system, which they're allowed to do. Constitution says Congress is allowed to decide what the courts look like. But what they had before is the Supreme Court judges, Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, that's what that means. They used to be the circuit judges as well, so they would go to different states and judge in those states and then come back to D.C. to be their supreme jobs, and that was just too much work for them. So they decided to hire new judges to do that role, to be the circuit court judges, and leave the Supreme Court in D.C. That means they have to hire 16 new judges. Okay. They also cut the Supreme Court from 6 members to 5 members because they were finding there were too many ties when they have an even number of judges, and they're allowed to do that too. Congress is allowed to decide how many Supreme Court justices there are. We've had 5, we've had 6, we've had 9. I think we had 11 at one point. We have 9 right now. But the thing is, the week before all new congressmen come in, all new president comes in, they're really doing this huge, massive change. But you're president until you're not president anymore. You're congressman until you're not a congressman anymore. So they have the right to do it, but it was kind of a jerk move to completely change the way government is happening right before the new guy comes in. In all, there were 58 vacancies. A lot of these are brand new jobs. We just created all these new courts. We need to hire all these new judges. Some of them very important people, some of them not so much. Late at night, on the very last day before he was done being president, hours before Jefferson was supposed to be president, John Adams hired 58 judges. It's like, seriously? You're getting all your people in just hours before you're not president anymore? Totally legal. Not very nice. He was still president, so he had the right to fulfill all his powers until the next day. But Jefferson said, that's sneaky, that's wrong. In fact, it ruined their friendship. They were political rivals for a while. They didn't always see eye to eye, but they were always buddies until the Alien Sedition Acts and then this. And for many years, they didn't talk to one another. Thankfully, decades later, after they had both retired from politics, Adams apologized for this. He said, this is probably the worst decision I made in politics. Which I definitely do respect that apology. And they did become friends again for the rest of their lives. Similar thing happened not too long ago. I was teaching a class, and President Obama is the president, and Justice Antonin Scalia passed away unexpectedly, and the president appointed Merrick Garland to be a member of the Supreme Court. It was a couple months before the election, but a lot of Republicans said, oh, you should just wait till after the election because maybe a Republican will win, and the Republican will want a conservative judge. And they said it was wrong for President Obama to appoint someone just months before the election. Well, just like with John Adams, he is the president. He's allowed to do it. Um, I don't think it was wrong. It was towards the end of his term, but he's still the president. And a Republican did win. Donald Trump did win. And Merrick Garland did not get in. The Republicans in Congress managed to stall until after the election when President Trump came in and he got his own Supreme Court justice. By the way, not too long before his next election, he was able to um, have another vacancy and fulfill, another seat in office. So, you know, Trump did a very similar thing. And when he did that, appoint a justice not too long before an election, Republicans aren't complaining about that. My take on it is you're president until you're not president anymore. And the other side might not like it very much. Republicans don't like it when the Democrats do it. Democrats don't like when the Republicans do it, but that's just politics for you. You win some, you lose some. And this leads us to a very important Supreme Court case called Marbury versus Madison. So Mr. Marbury was one of those judges that was hired, the night before. He was one of those midnight appointments. He was not given his commission, which is his contract. Before Jefferson came into office, that contract is still on someone's desk, the Secretary of State's desk in D.C. So he was told that he was appointed, but he doesn't have his job yet. He doesn't have the contract yet, and he's not technically the judge until he receives that piece of paper in his hands. So James Madison is the new Secretary of State, and he inherits the office, he inherits all the paperwork, and he sees that contract on his desk, and he goes, oh, that's the guy the other party wants in politics. I'm not going to hire him. I'm not going to give him his contract. Now, to become a judge, the president has to appoint you, and the Senate has to vote yes. And then you got to give that piece of paper to the dude. The president appointed Mr. Marbury. The Senate voted yes on him. Technically, Mr. Marbury deserved to be judge. Maybe it wasn't the very kindest thing Adams ever did, but he got the job. He just didn't have the piece of paper. And Madison refused to give him the piece of paper. What are we going to do about that? So what we're going to do is Mr. Marbury is going to sue Mr. Madison, and he's going to try to get the court to force him to give him that piece of paper. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, ruled that Marbury does indeed deserve to be hired. But then they went one step further, and they said the Supreme Court cannot force someone to obey the law. Enforcing the law is the president's job. It is the executive branch's job. It is not the judge's job to force someone to do what's right. It is the president's job to deliver that letter. There was a law that said, the Congress passed a law that said the judges are allowed to do this. The Supreme Court said, but the Constitution says, no, we're not. Whose job is it to enforce the law? Not the judges, not the Congress, the executive branch, the president's branch. The law that Congress passed said that they can force Madison to act, but the court ruled that law was unconstitutional. This is the very first time a court ruled that Congress did an oopsie. Congress made a mistake or just did wrong. Congress disobeyed the Constitution. Who is going to stand up to Congress when they disobey the Constitution? The Supreme Court. It's not the states, not even really the president. It's the Supreme Court's job to do that. So SCOTUS claims something called judicial review. The judges are allowed to review laws and decide if they're constitutional or not. And they claimed that power here, and they've been using it ever since. And here's a quote from Mr. Marshall. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. And if the law that you passed is different from the Constitution or another law, we get to say that your law is unconstitutional and it's gone. It is our job to interpret and apply the laws, and if we interpret that your laws are unconstitutional, we kick them out. Now, that issue of who gets to stand up to the Congress and decide whether law is constitutional or not, that's a million times more important than whether or not Mr. Marbury should be a judge. And if I recall correctly, I don't think Mr. Marbury did get that job